May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, our Lord and our Redeemer. Amen. This week before the 4th of July is usually a blur for me, a blur of cleaning, shopping, and decluttering our house in preparation for the annual 4th of July party that we always give. We live on the parade route of the 4th of July parade in Alameda, and we usually have this party with our next-door neighbors. This year, of course, the city of Alameda canceled the parade for the first time ever, and we've canceled the party for the first time in 19 years. I'm a little sad, but also a little relieved. I'm a little relieved because it is a lot of work. And this year especially, I'm relieved because I'm a little tired of the usual rah-rah 4th of July patriotism. So often the 4th of July is a celebration of American individualism and exceptionalism. This year, on Independence Day weekend, we're seeing just how interdependent we are. We're seeing that what one person does affects another by simply wearing a mask or not. We're seeing that we're not separate individuals. We are a community. I am a little sad about the cancellation because the parade is always fun, and so is the party once it's underway. I'm also sad because the pandemic has canceled our summer travel plans, including 2 out-of-town weddings, and the usual rhythm of our summer. I'm sad because I really need something to look forward to. I think it's important to have something to look forward to. It grounds us in hope. What are you looking forward to? What grounds us in hope as a community of faith? Our reading from Zechariah is usually read before another kind of parade, the Palm Sunday procession during the Liturgy of the Palms. I'm glad to see it show up here in the lectionary in the summer because I don't think it gets its due crammed in with everything else on Palm Sunday. The Jewish people were looking forward to a Messiah who would come, liberate them from oppression, and lead them in peace. Early Christians saw foreshadowing of Jesus coming as the Messiah in the Hebrew Scriptures, and these passages are known as messianic prophecies, and this passage from Zechariah is one of them. The king we see in the passage is an unusual king. He is triumphant and victorious, but humble. And he rides a donkey. Why a donkey and not a horse? In the 21st century, we are far removed from understanding these symbols. The donkey was a familiar, gentle beast that worked alongside humble people as they farmed and brought their harvest to market. The donkey was a beast of peace by its very nature and by its work alongside the people during times of peace and fruitfulness. The horse was something different. At that time, the horse was primarily a beast of war that pulled chariots and transported soldiers. We see this in the verse that says, "The Messiah will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and war horse from Jerusalem." Jesus was well familiar with this passage, and he chose to enter Jerusalem riding on a donkey as a symbol of his coming for all the people, not as a military overlord. Zechariah says that the bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea. Jesus was also familiar with this call to a new movement in history. Zechariah was writing in the 5th century BC when the Jewish people were exiled. His words are pastoral and comforting and gives the people a powerful hope, something to look forward to. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. Prisoners of hope. What a phrase to meditate upon today. Hope can seem elusive in these strange times. It feels more likely that we're prisoners of cynicism than of hope. But once we have hope, it can be tenacious. Hope can take us prisoner and march us to freedom. Hope is active. It requires us to buy into it and invest in making something new happen. Being a follower of Christ, walking the way, is the way of hope. Following Christ means we are always becoming, always growing in faith. Sister Joan Chittister writes in her book, Scarred by Struggle, Transformed by Hope, that, quote, hope is about allowing ourselves to believe in the future we cannot see, about trusting in God. Then we can hope because we have no reason to hope. In the midst of our summer of canceled parades and canceled services, I want to be a prisoner of hope. I want to learn how to actively hope in these days of uncertainty and transition. I think our other readings also have something to teach us this morning. In Romans, we hear Paul wrestling with his flawed humanity and the gap between doing what he knows is right and what he actually does. He cries, I do not understand my own actions. He accurately describes the feeling of helplessness when we are prisoners not of hope, but of sin. Lately, as I examine my life of white privilege and the biases that I have absorbed from an early age, I feel a bit like Paul. I do not understand my own actions. It seems like an impossible task to shed these unconscious patterns that I have learned over a lifetime. Like Paul, I cry out, who will rescue me from this body of death? And yet I know that Christ is calling me and other white Americans like me to do the difficult work of acknowledging our participation in the systemic sin of racism in our society and turning in a new direction of love. In our gospel passage today, we hear Jesus speaking to this generation who did not want to listen to John the Baptist or to Jesus. Like children playing together in the street, they are fickle about their attention and setting the rules of the game. I hear some resonance with our situation now in 2020. We have not listened to the voices of Black Americans, and society has continually moved the rules of the game just beyond their reach. In our passage, Jesus thanks God that God has hidden wisdom from the wise and the intelligent and revealed them to infants. Young people have an innate sense of justice, and they have less to lose except the future, which holds the possibility of being changed by them. The New York Times had a story last Sunday on the young activists of today's Black Lives Matter movement. One was a teenage girl from San Ramon in our suburban world who had never been to a protest, let alone organized one. She and another girl organized a demonstration at the Golden Gate Bridge and expected a few people to show up, but instead thousands showed up in support of the cause. This is truly a sign of hope. In the closing verses of our gospel today, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Our heavy burdens weigh us down because we are trying to carry them all on our own. It's exhausting. It's exhausting to be an individual only, to live only inside our own heads. Like Paul says in our passage from Romans, we are limited in our abilities to change on our own. What can we do differently? How can we find healing as well as rest? Like Paul, we can say, "Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ, our Lord." Jesus invites us into relationship with God through him. Jesus invites us to be yoked with him in partnership along the path of faith. He invites us to share our burdens with him. He is so much stronger than we are. Strong, humble, and gentle. Strength does not require the uniform of force and violence. That's what Christ teaches us. He invites us to bring our whole selves for healing by wearing his yoke with him. He invites us to learn his point of view and see everyone as beloved children of God. He invites us to be more than an individual. He invites us to become a member of the communion of saints and to see this broken world as a community. Usually at this point in a sermon, I would say Christ invites us to his table for communion. Even though we cannot receive communion right now, the invitation is still there, and we long to accept it. Today, let us receive that invitation and receive Christ into our hearts and find rest for our souls. That is truly something to look forward to. Amen.